Good evening once again, gentlemen. We were looking at Dijkstra's Notes on Structured Programming, and last time we looked at his chapter on our inability to do much. And he closed by talking about how we have to remember that we are slow-witted human beings. So let's learn to respect our limitations. And the same themes continue in over here. So let's get into it. On the reliability of mechanisms. So Dijkstra says, being a programmer by trade, programs are what I am talking about. And the true subject of this section is the reliability of programs. That, nevertheless, I have mentioned mechanisms in its title is because I regard programs as specific instances of mechanisms, and that I wanted to express at least once my strong feeling that many of my considerations concerning software are mutatis mutandis, just as relevant for hardware design. So mutatis mutandis is an old legal term. It just means if you apply the same principle but in a new domain. So, if the law says that a man cannot kill, for example, say the law says that if a man kills another man, then he should be punished in such and such a way. The law will just be applied mutatis mutandis to a woman if she kills a man, or a woman if she kills a woman. So you just translate things across. Maybe a better example of that would be, say there's a fine imposed. So the law says that if you destroy one building, well, let's just Google this, but pretty sure I know what it means. Mutatis mutandis, with the necessary changes having been made. So yeah, when you want to apply an existing rule, agreement, or concept to a new situation. So hope that's clear. So he's saying that his considerations about software are mutatis mutandis, just as relevant for hardware design. Present-day computers, he continues, are amazing pieces of equipment, but most amazing of all are the uncertain grounds on account of which we attach any validity to their output. It starts already with our belief that the hardware functions properly. Let us restrict for a moment our attention to the hardware, and let us wonder to what extent one can convince oneself of its being properly constructed. Some years ago, a machine was installed on the premises of my university. In its documentation, it was stated that it contained, among many other things, a circuitry for the fixed point multiplication of two 27-bit integers. A legitimate question seems to be, is this multiplier correct? Is it performing according to the specifications? The naive answer to this is, well, the number of different multiplications this multiplier is claimed to perform correctly is finite, namely 2 to the 54, so let us try them all. But reasonable as this answer may seem, it is not, for although a single multiplication took only some tens of microseconds, the total time needed for this finite set of multiplications would add up to more than 10,000 years. And let's just think about this quickly. 2 to the 54. So the rule is, if you just want to understand how to think of powers of 10, 2 to the 10 is 10 to the third. 2 to the 10 is 1024, as you should know as a programmer. 10 bits makes 1024 states, different states. This is like 10 raised to the third power if you're thinking roughly. So this is like 1,000. So this is 5 sets of thousands, 5 orders of thousands. So you're going to have 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. Or I believe it's 1 quintillion. Quintillion or quadrillion? 18. No, it's quadrillion then. Sorry. So it's 1 quadrillion, 1 followed by 15 zeros. And then we're going to have a 16 because there's a fourth power here. So 16 quadrillion states. Then he says, let's suppose that it takes a tenth of a microsecond. A microsecond is 10 to the minus 6. So a tenth of 10 microseconds is 10 to the minus 5. So we subtract 5 from the 15 zeros, and we end up with 10 zeros. So 16 times 10 billion, or 160 billion. Now 160 billion, how long is that? 160 billion seconds. 60, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 seconds is, well, let's just divide it by 3600 to get the hours, and then divide this by 24 to get the days, and then divide this by 365 to get the years. I think it's more like 150 years or something, or 5,000 years. Okay, yeah, so basically when he says some tens, maybe he means 2 tens, you get 10,000 years. So his math is right. But the strong point here is, if you think about what we have today, so today we have teraflop machines. We have 64-bit multipliers that are doing teraflop order computations. But let's continue on. We must conclude that exhaustive testing, even of a single component, such as a multiplier, is entirely out of the question. Testing a complete computer on the same basis would imply the correct processing of all possible programs. And this is a very strong point over here. What is Dijkstra really trying to say? He's not really getting, you can misunderstand what he's saying here. This is not just like highfalutin science speech where and no one obviously has proposed doing anything like this, but he's trying to show us that the space of possibilities when you're dealing with a computer is so unbelievably large that our intuition breaks down when we approach it, and you have to think anew. A first consequence of the 10,000 years is that during its lifetime, the multiplier will be asked to perform only a negligible fraction of the vast number of all possible multiplications it could do, practically none of them. Funnily enough, we still require that it would do any multiplication correctly when ordered to do so. The reason underlying this fantastic quality requirement is that we do not know in advance which are the negligibly few multiplications it will be asked to perform. In our reasoning about programs, we talk about the product we have abstracted from the specific values of the factors. We do not know them, we do not wish to know them, and it is not our business to know them. It is not our business to know them, it is not our business to know them. Our wish to think in terms of the concept, the product, abstracted from the specific instances occurring in a computation, is granted, but the price paid for this is precisely the reliability requirement that any multiplication of the vast set will be performed correctly. So much for the justification of our desire for correct multiplier. And it's just well to pause here and think about that. Just how much of what appears simple when you're typing code as a programmer relies on generations of unbelievable engineering, particularly at the hardware level. Dijkstra continues, but how is the correctness established in a convincing manner? As long as the multiplier is considered as a black box, the only thing we can do is testing by sampling, i.e. offering to the multiplier a feasible amount of factor pairs and checking the results. But in view of the 10,000 years, it is clear that we can only test a negligible fraction of the possible multiplications. Whole classes of, in some sense, critical multiplications may remain untested, and in view of the reliability justly desired, our quality control is still most unsatisfactory. Therefore, it is not done that way. The straightforward conclusion is the following: a convincing demonstration of correctness being impossible as long as the mechanism is regarded as a black box, our only hope lies in not regarding the mechanism as a black box. I shall call this taking the structure of the mechanism into account. And just as a point over here, think about the fact that people say that they can become certain that their programs are correct, particularly LLM-generated programs are correct by writing tests. I mean, wouldn't that be just madness? Now, granted, if you've designed a full program and you understand how it works and you've built it up progressively, often a test can show something very important. So this is not the same thing, but what I'm saying is when someone's just vibe coding up a tool and then doesn't read the code, now you remove the reading of the code, that's the same thing as black box engineering, where you're treating the actual code that the LLM has generated as a black box, and then now you attempt to study the tests, and you imagine that from the tests you can induce some sort of confidence about the behavior of the system as a whole. And Dijkstra's argument here shows, even though he's talking about hardware, that that's a completely foolish way to approach programming. From now onwards, the type of mechanisms we are going to deal with are programs. In many respects, programs are mechanisms much easier to deal with than circuitry, which is really an analog device and subject to wear and tear. And also with programs, it is fairly hopeless to establish the correctness beyond even the mildest doubt by testing without taking their structure into account. In other words, we remark that the extent to which program correctness can be established is not purely a function of the program's external specifications and behavior, but depends critically upon its internal structure. And I really submit that if you understand that, you will not really worry about the way the world is changing right now. And you'll also see that this LLM revolution, significant as it is, there are some things it can't change. So it may change how we work. It will not change the difficulty of programming, because this is a fundamental difficulty. Recalling that our true concern is with really large programs, we observe as an aside that size itself requires a high confidence level for the individual program components. If the chance of correctness of an individual component equals P, the chance of correctness of a whole program composed of n such components is something like big P equals little p to the n. As n will be very large, a lowercase p should be very, very close to 1 if we desire p to differ significantly from 0. And this is now easily seen if you know about like graphs where you have just exponential graphs where you have a base that is between 0 and 1. So like exponential, like say we put graph of 0.9 to the x, right? Come on. Here we go. So here's 0.9 to the x. And you can see that by the time you get to 10 components, let's just suppose you have 90% certainty about each of the components in your program. By the time you get to 10 components, these could be lines of code, these could be functions. By the time you get to 10, there is likely a less than 0.5. So higher than 50% odds that you have an error. And you'll be pretty close to 0.1 before you get to 25 components. And you can easily see. So like, even if you take 0.999, like if you say that on an average line of code, I'm 99.9% correct. If you have 1,000 lines of code, then there's a 70% chance effectively that you have a bug in those those lines of code. And how many of you would actually claim that you're 99.9% right in most of in every line of code that you write? So this is why bugs are basically impossible to eliminate through superficial methodologies. And this principle here we like to call Dijkstra's law. When we now take the position, Dijkstra's first law, when we now take the position that it is not only the programmer's task to produce a correct program, but also to demonstrate its correctness in a convincing manner, then the above remarks have a profound influence on the programmer's activity. The object he has to produce must be usefully structured. And this is the deep definition of what a programmer is doing. You're not just producing software which appears to work. You're producing software for which there is justified true belief that it will work correctly. Justified true belief. There has to be some kind of knowledge that this system is going to work and why it's going to work. You can't achieve that with an LLM unless you just outsource your trust to the LLM. The only way that an LLM can be used to produce software which is reliable is if you pilot it the whole way through and you read all the code and you understand all the code. But you remove yourself from the loop, then unless the LLM is giving you a formal proof of the correctness or of the semantic properties of the code that is generated, you have no capacity to predict the behavior of the program once you take it outside the very negligible portion of examples that you've tried it for. Just going to read this again because it's so profound. It is not only the programmer's task to produce a correct program, but also to demonstrate its correctness in a convincing manner. So the next paragraph. The remaining part of this monograph will mainly be an exploration of what program structure can be used to good advantage. In what follows, it will become apparent that program correctness is not my only concern. Program adaptability or manageability will be another. This stress on program manageability is my deliberate choice, a choice that, therefore, I should like to justify. And now I just want to also take this, because this is basically the thesis statement of Notes on Structured Programming. So Dijkstra was exploring what kind of program structure can be used to good advantage if you want to be able to produce a convincing demonstration of the correctness of your programs. So he's investigating the preconditions of formal proof in programming. That's what structured programming is about. Structured programming is not about don't use goto, like sort of that is a very superficial thing to say. It's like saying don't drink alcohol, and you somehow imagine that if you don't drink alcohol, you will be a disciplined and orderly person. Now, some disciplined and orderly people don't drink alcohol, but that's not really the issue here. Like, if you're disciplined and orderly, you may be able to drink alcohol in an appropriate way, but if you just show up and say, or let me be more radical and say, like, what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes people take superficial advice. So a rule like don't use goto, and think that they've understood a deep principle, and they really haven't. So this is what Notes on Structured Programming is about. It's about what program structure can be used to good advantage when you're trying to demonstrate the correctness of your programs. So Dijkstra wants to now justify his stress on program manageability. So not only correctness, but he says adaptability or manageability. While in the past, the growth in power of the generally available equipment has mitigated the urgency of the efficiency requirements, this very same growth has created its new difficulties. Once one has a powerful machine at one's disposal, one tries to use it, and the size of the problems one tackles adjusts itself to the scope of the equipment. No one thinks about programming an algorithm that would take 20 years to execute. With processing power increased by a factor of 1,000 over the last 10 to 15 years, man has become considerably more ambitious in selecting problems that should be technically feasible. Size, complexity, and sophistication of programs one should like to make have exploded, and over the past years it has become patently clear that on the whole our programming ability has not kept pace with these exploding demands made on it. The power of available equipment will continue to grow. We can expect manufacturers to develop still faster machines, and even without that development, we shall witness that the type of machine that is presently considered as exceptionally fast will become more and more common. The things we should like to do with these machines will grow in proportion, and it is on this extrapolation that I have formed my picture of the programmer's task. My conclusion is that it is becoming most urgent to stop to consider programming primarily as a minimization of a cost over performance ratio. We should recognize that already now programming is much more an intellectual challenge. The art of programming is the art of organizing complexity, of mastering multitude, and avoiding its bastard chaos as effectively as possible. And here, Dijkstra's prose. This is why I say that this is a meditation upon the nature of programming. Mastering multitude and avoiding its bastard chaos as effectively as possible. My refusal to regard efficiency considerations as the programmer's prime concern is not meant to imply that I disregard them. On the contrary, efficiency considerations are recognized as one of the main incentives to modifying a logically correct program. My point, however, is that we can only afford to optimize, whatever that may be, provided that the program remains sufficiently manageable. Let me end this section with a final aside on the significance of computers. Computers are extremely flexible and powerful tools, and many feel that their application is changing the face of the earth. I would venture the opinion that as long as we regard them primarily as tools, we grossly underestimate their significance. Their influence as tools might turn out to be but a ripple on the surface of our culture, whereas I expect them to have a much more profound influence in their capacity of intellectual challenge. And then he puts here a kind of PS, Dijkstra's most famous quote: program testing can be used to show the presence of bugs, but never to show their absence. So I hesitate to add to these wonderful words of Dijkstra, but I just want to point out that this is why programming is so interesting. It really is hard. There's been, I think, a campaign because people need to learn how to program generally, but there's a very strong impression that if you Google it, people say anyone can learn to program and so forth. And I believe that. I really do believe that anyone who wants to learn can learn to program, and many people should learn. It should be, as Steve Jobs once said, a liberal art. That being said, it's not easy. Real programming, if you actually care about what's going to happen, if it's not just a toy, programming is hard. Programming is a really, really difficult skill. But it's also a very rewarding challenge where we actually get to stretch our minds. And this is why it's so much fun to read someone like Dijkstra, because you get to think once, you get to actually think alongside a great mind, and you're not limited by, some of the assumptions that have crept up over the past few years, but also the effect of spending time. He who walks with the wise becomes wise. And Dijkstra's insight into programming, for that to rub off on us, that make us very, very gifted, or very, very capable in our pursuit of being great programmers. So next time we'll look at on our mental aids.